So I'm Writing a Novel is the show where you join me, Oliver Brackenbury, on the journey of writing my next novel, from first ideas all the way to publication and promotion. In this one-man reality show, I'll share with you my ever-evolving thoughts and feelings on how I write, being a writer, and everything that entails at each stage of the process. I'll also interview special guests, and when people send them in, I'll answer listener questions. If you're the kind of person who likes to learn how things are made and get to know the people making them, then this is the show for you. I'd like to say a quick thank you to our Patreon supporters who make this show possible. Patrons receive perks like the rarely wielded but very powerful ability to vote in patron-exclusive polls which shape the future of what I do in the Patreon, but also in the podcast. And if you're not a patron already, you can check out all the other perks and exclusive content over at patreon.com/soimwritinganovel. You may have noticed that the intro music for this episode was a little different. Well, that's because it was played by the band Glasshammer. They're a prog rock group formed in 1992, featuring multi-instrumentalist Steve Babb, my guest for today. Steve is a big fan of sword and sorcery and has written his own sword and sorcery novel called Scalagrim, In the Vales of Pagarna, which he was kind enough to send me a copy of to read. I rather enjoyed it, and the clear intersection between it and the whole way one might write a concept album. There's quite a bit of actual songs within the text of the book, with something I'll get into with Steve in just a minute. Meanwhile, music is a very important part of the fan community of sword and sorcery, and it tends to be in genres that I have not dabbled in too much, like heavy metal, like prog rock, though I confess I do enjoy some stuff in the latter category. I just kind of forget sometimes that I enjoy it until it comes on the radio and I'm like, oh yeah, I should get more of this. Anyway, point being, this is an aspect of the whole thing that I'm a little ignorant of, and so I thought, what a great opportunity after meeting Steve through the Whetstone Tavern Discord, where I get so many guests. But yes, after meeting Steve through there and looking at his book and all that stuff, I thought, what a great opportunity for me to learn more about that side of things through someone who's directly a part of it. All right, without further ado, let's go on to talk to Steve Babb of the band Glasshammer. And here we are with Steve Babb. Hi, Steve.
Hey, how are you doing today?
Great, man, great. So, Steve, I know you've got to get back to the exciting life of a musician. It's a drum recording this weekend.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Starting at the shallow end of the pool, could you please tell us what your relationship is to sword and sorcery? Like, why did you choose to write that instead of, I don't know, hard-boiled detectives or something else?
I have a love for the genre that goes back to my teenage years, which would be, mid 70s to 1980, somewhere in there. I'm 61. So, I loved it. Of course, like most people that came to fantasy, it started with Tolkien and then branched out from there. And it really wasn't, in those formative years, I didn't think of them in terms of subgenres. It was all fantasy to me, and it was all new. But I remember watching the movie, the animation, the Ralph Bakshi movie, Wizards.
Yeah.
I knew he was going to do something with Lord of the Rings, so I made my mom take me to, to the theater to see that crazy movie. And I don't know, I just love that. Excalibur was another big film of the time that, and Conan, of course. Uh, but back to your, I guess, to the main question, I wanted to do an album trilogy that would be based on. Well, first it started as just a one album thing for Glass Hammer, and it would I wanted it to be about a loner, sort of like a High Plains drifter kind of character, and maybe set to a Western theme. And my songwriting partner and my wife, who I refer to for advice often, were like, "No, no Western prog rock albums, please." Well, what else? And so I, with progressive rock, it's a very cliche thing to do stuff about wizards and elves, and I mean, people don't do that so much in prog rock, but that's what it's sort of known for. And I thought, well, let's just embrace those cliches and let's make it a sword and sorcery character, more like Conan or Elric. And I started developing the story, and the more I got into the character and the writing for the album, the more I began to think, hey, this is working for me. I like the character. I like the setup to the story. I think I'm going to write this as more than just an album. So it all kind of happened about the same time, I guess 2019, somewhere. Well, right when the lockdown started and everybody did all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, we all got a lot more time to be creative. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, I'll show them. I'll just write a book. So 6 weeks of lockdown, but I don't know, 7 months of writing, and I finally finished a book. Anyway, I hope that's a long answer, I guess.
No, it's okay. It's all good stuff. And honestly, we can sort of go back even earlier to before you started working on that, Scalagram here. I'm wondering, what are the origins of you as like a younger person with your writing and your music careers, and how have they like intersected? Maybe even one's more dominant over the other one for a while, and the other one kind of takes over. How generally speaking, how have these evolved for you, and where did they begin?
I started playing. I was a piano player from age 9, and they stuck me in our church. I became the pianist at age 12, and didn't particularly enjoy that pressure, but and it was kind of in the cards early on that I was going to be a musician. And of course, by the time I'm in my late teens, rock is big and heavy metal is a big part of my life, and wanting to be in a band is a big thing. So the Tolkien influences and the music for me all happened at that crucial moment between 15 and 17, when all those things are getting wired in your brain. And in my case, they got wired in together. And I saw music from the very beginning as a way to tell stories. And so it's never been far from, I mean, that's kind of what I've always done with original music, is kind of tell sagas, concept albums, things like that. My first real, I'd say, semi-popular band in our area was a band I named Wizards after the film, and we wore capes.
Nice.
We wore capes. It was 1980, and the songs were all these dramatic things, like Iron Maiden kind of stuff, Rush, and Sabbath, and so real dark, and so it was perfect vehicle for me to kind of lyrically tell stories, and I'd say that's never changed for me. I try to write a simple song. It ends up getting turned into some epic nonsense, I guess.
Very cool. Was Scalagram your first prose project then, or did you try writing novels and short stories before?
I wrote, so we had a big concept album, and it's always tied to my music. But we had a big concept album. I sort of brainstormed in 2005. The album was called The Inconsolable Secret, which is from a quote by C.S. Lewis. And it was about the lady of Shalott. There's famous paintings of her. It's a kind of an obscure Arthurian tale about a girl who's trapped in a tower, princess, and I wanted to kind of expand on that and add to that story, and it just kind of took off as my own character, which I named Lyrizel. And I thought, hey, to go with this album, I'm going to write an epic poem, like the Lays of Beleriand, like Tolkien. And so I wrote this massive, I think it's 20,000 words. It all rhymes. It's just insane. And called The Lay of Lyrizel. And then I wanted to turn that into a book, an actual novel. And I started it in, I guess, the late 2000s, 2008 or 9, and left it at about 40,000 words. Music and life just took over, and I couldn't do it. But then when the Scalagram character came along, just a couple of years ago, it hit me how that could all go together into this mythos that I created for our band. So the stories are tied together. So another long answer, but no, I wrote and self-published The Lay of Lyrizel. I guess it actually became a book in 2015, maybe. It took me a while to
Okay, so the writing and prose came a bit later than music was sort of the main thing for most of your life, it sounds like. That's cool. And I mean, it sounds like you kind of already answered one of my questions, but I'll toss it at you anyways. How would you say, your experience writing music influences your prose writing and vice versa? Like, does experience writing lyrics maybe influence the rhythm and meter of your prose? I mean, obviously in the poetry, I would think, but in the sort of straight prose, do you find yourself thinking differently about how sentences sound because of how you've had to think about lyrics?
Yes and no. It's not conscious on my part. Prose for me is more. I guess I'm more inspired by somebody like Lord Dunsany than I am my music. And in fact, I've tried to incorporate Dunsany's prose style into some of our lyrics. So I think that my writing is probably more influenced by other people's writing than music, but my music is influenced by those people's writing, if that makes sense. It's not something I think out. It's just like with music, though. Whatever bands I grew up I liked, I don't hide it in our music. If I want to make a nod towards someone musically, like Black Sabbath, you'll hear stuff that's going to remind you of that, and Rush and Yes and all these other bands I like. I'm not going to hide it in my writing of novels either. It's I thought the idea of combining something like some of the heavy adjectives of Lovecraft with some of the prose of Dunsany, and swords flashing, and so I do catch it, and I've had people tell me, "Oh, we can tell you're a songwriter when we read your stuff." And I don't know how that works, but I guess it's in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's curious, isn't it? You can't really seem to. I mean, we all have our influences, and I don't think anyone should ever try to really hide them. I mean, it's foolish because they'll be in there anyway, right? They've imprinted on you.
Mm-hmm.
But to people saying, "No, I can tell you're a songwriter," and you wondering, "Oh, really?" I sympathize because I'm originally trained more as a screenwriter, and in my prose, people will say, "Oh, I can tell you're a screenwriter." It's kind of clipped, very image, driven. And then people read my screenplays and like, "Oh, I can tell you're a prose writer." I'm like, which, how?
Yeah. Well, they can see it more than we can. Yeah.
I suppose that's true, but oh man. I gotta say, one of the reasons I was really excited to have you on, Steve, is because, I've been studying the genre pretty intently the last 5 years or so, and, getting to talk to interesting people like yourself only further enriching my knowledge. But man, I don't know if you've noticed, a listener, Steve and I both met through the Whetstone Tavern Discord I mentioned here so frequently. And there's one channel on that Discord I just never, ever poke my head into is the music one because my tastes just lay elsewhere, but also, to the genres that tend to dominate. But also, if there's one aspect of sword and sorcery which I'm just woefully ignorant of, it is the role of music in its fandom and why certain genres, metal, prog rock, are particularly popular. Would you mind, just from your lived experience, educating me and those listening on the subject and how Glasshammer fits into that?
I think sword and sorcery. It's a hard. I mean, we all know exactly what it is, but it's hard to condense into a few words. But it's dramatic, and the style of music that certain people are drawn to write, they're kind of given to that. I mean, it's got a drama to it, I think. So it's easy. I would say that scholars of progressive rock might tell you that it was born out of late '60s drugs and psychedelia. I'm not qualified to speak on that because I was a child when the prog rock genre sort of came to be. But I believe a lot of people in the '60s were just heavy into Tolkien, and I'm old enough to remember, the airbrushed vans, of wizards shooting bolts, out of, so there's just a lot of that in that era as that music developed, and all those rock stars of the late '60s and '70s, in progressive rock, especially, I'd say, were into Lord of the Rings, Moorcock. There was the band Hawkwind that they probably still
Right. I
exist
know a
on
little
some
bit
level.
about
Yeah.
that, but do you mind
Yeah.
expanding upon Moorcock and his, the influence in music and his role? Because like he wrote lyrics for some bands or something.
Yeah,
This is
he
my blank spot.
he definitely did for the band Hawkwind. I don't know who else he was involved with, but so that was my first indication, I guess, in that I probably didn't discover them until the '80s, that there was a writer of fantasy who I read that was associated with a pretty cool, trippy kind of metal. It's called space rock, is what they do. And I think he came out on stage with them and read some poetry, and then he did write some lyrics. And so I even tried to incorporate that with we have a writer. He just passed away a couple of years. I don't know if you're familiar with him, named Robert Lowe, who
Okay.
wrote the Oathsworn trilogies. He was great with Viking fiction. It's sort of sword and sorcery. And anyway, he ended up being a fan of Glass Hammer, and so he wrote some poetry, and we put it to music, and tried to keep that kind of interesting marriage of literature and music going hand in hand. But I don't know that much about how it happened. I just know that musicians at that time were really into fantasy, and the album covers, really showed that off too. The was a famous, iconic artist named Roger Dean who did all the Yes covers, and we got to work with him on a Glass Hammer album cover. Super guy, but he sort of had these fantastic landscapes and just really trippy kind of stuff. Not psychedelic. I guess as the '70s drew on, it became more fantasy album cover art. So something was going on there.
Well, certainly everybody was looking at Frazetta and going, "That's interesting." I can't help but imagine he influenced some of this album art.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't. He didn't do the Molly Hatchet covers. That was I can't remember who did that, but it had a Frazetta look to it. Yeah, and I was one of those kids that had that Frazetta book. I had Roger Dean's book and I had Frazetta's, and just used to just stare at that stuff. Before I read Conan, I'm sure I was into Frazetta.
Cool. And so, where do you feel the Glass Hammer fits into this kind of tradition?
Well, they credited us in the early '90s, some French magazine, with the rebirth of the concept album. And we were probably one of the first after several years to kind of revive that. And again, it just all comes back to a desire to tell stories. And the best way to do that at that time in my life was through music. So we've become well known in our circles for concept albums.
I feel like I was going to ask this further in the interview, but I think now's a good time. We were kind of adjacent to the art side of things. I really dig the cover art on, Scalagrim, the book.
Thank you.
And I deeply appreciated that there is some interior illustration as well, including a classic fantasy map right near the start.
Okay.
How similar would you say are the things you want from the cover of your novel as opposed to the cover of your albums? I mean, is it more or less the same, or do you feel there's something else you want to go for?
Yeah, there's something else I want to go for when I discovered that particular artist, and for the book, and you never know when you're looking at an image online, what it's going to look like in print, because it's all backlit and it's beautiful, and then suddenly it's like, wait a minute, I'm looking at it right now. It's like a little too dark. I don't know that and I'm into marketing music and marketing this book too. So I have to think, well, what's going to stand out? Because you get about a tiny little square of space or rectangle to sell that idea. People judge books by their covers. It's just
Yeah, the thumbnail really has influenced cover art, hasn't it? Christ.
and I'm not sure mine works so well as a thumbnail as it does when you actually see the thing. And again, especially when it's back on the screen, it's just got this weirdness to it. It's got that sort of new cliche thing where you've got a swordsman facing the opposite direction because they don't want you to see his face. That's a big thing. And I just don't like those, all those, they look like pre-generated covers where it's always some girl with a bow or somebody but they're not looking at you, they're looking off at whatever's going to kill them. But with this, it's just a strange enough sort of smeary sort of art that I think it gives you a lot more room to try to fill in the gaps for yourself. And that to me was important for this. I hope that I'll be able to stick with this artist for the rest of these books.
Right, I'm looking on the inside here. They go by the name Waking of Sky Tree.
I never got the name out of the guy. I never got his name. I'm like, I got to give you a credit, and that's his credit. It's strange.
Okay, Waking of Sky Tree. So if people want to check him out, they can Google that. Okay.
Yeah, he's got a lot of good stuff online, and it's all very similar. And he was very kind about, very quickly, like working with the sword on the cover. It was a little short, it was a little off, and I'm like, could you adjust this? Could you make it longer, more intimidating? And I don't know, an hour later, he sends the cover, so he's fast. And I like that.
Well, that's a value for sure.
Yeah.
In collaboration. Yeah.
But we've got an artist that I've worked with for 10 years or more now with Glass Hammer named Michael Zay Larank, and he's an excellent he's not an illustrator, he's just a great design artist. And he's done my Scalagram albums a little more literal than I would have wanted the book. So he's still helping me out with it. But yeah, I just this artist. And
cool.
If he'll stick with me, I'll stick with it. If it's a trilogy or a quartet of books, it needs to look alike. So, we'll see.
Okay, yeah, and I do dig what you're saying about your cover because, yeah, true, you do have kind of an over-the-shoulder person looking, holding a sword or whatever. But yeah, I agree. Having that sort of you need room to engage the imagination of the viewer, right? I mean, I think about what you were saying a moment ago about those books of art you stared at as a young man, and I mean, what are you doing, right? It's not that it takes you that long to register what's on the page; it's that you're imagining, you're thinking, "Oh man, what's the story behind this image? Where does it come from? Where is it going?" And I think the sort of bit of smeariness, bit of darkness, sort of a hazy view of the city ahead, as opposed to a perfectly crisp, computer colored photorealistic thing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's part of what grabbed me, frankly. I was kind of like,
I'm glad
I
you
want to
like
see what's
it.
going on here.
I haven't heard a lot of comments about it yet, but I'm glad you like it. My son is 20, and he's very critical of, at this age of what I do or don't do, and very, very helpful, actually, because I'm trying to be relevant, And he was like, oh, I like that. That doesn't look like anything else. Good, because I hope it doesn't read like anything else either. So, I mean, I'm sure it does.
Well, there you go. Yeah, and then you've got, as I say, the fantasy map on the inside, right, which I rather enjoyed.
Good.
Classic touch. And then a nice big black and white illustration on the interior, which most novels aren't doing anymore.
I liked I just had reread the Elric books, my favorite version of them, I guess. And it seems like I got one through Amazon. I lost my old copies, and it had illustrations in it. And that was sort of the inspiration. Like, hey, let's stick one of those in there. Now, the guy that did that illustration, he did illustrations for our albums.
Oh, cool. Okay.
For the Scalagram albums, which I think is pretty neat. That was part of the idea originally, was let's make this look like some old sword and sorcery project. And I commissioned an ink artist to do sketches, the sword fighters, and just another phenomenal guy. I can't pronounce his last name, but it's Luke Eidenschink, I think is his name. Just a phenomenal ink artist. and works really fast and really excited. He's got a cool Instagram account, and I think that's where I discovered. So he's done, I don't know, I think something in maybe 16 or 17 illustrations for the albums so far.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool, man, because, like, you know, I think if there's one thing I definitely missed from when I was a kid, sort of in the, 80s through 90s, it's finding those interior illustrations because, like, yeah, I've got a functional imagination, but it's fun to see an interpretation and kind of compare, oh, okay, there's how I imagine the character, here's how they've rendered them, how do I think about that? And then you start to identify a certain artist style with a series, and, yeah, I imagine it's mostly cost cutting that has reduced that as a trend in most books these days. I don't think it's because people got fed up with cool art.
Right, yeah. Well, and you notice too that I did the trick in the back where, in that back illustration, where my character's facing the opposite direction. But Luke drew several illustrations where Scalagram is face on. And it was so early when he developed how he looked that I didn't ever think that it looked like I wanted him to look, and so I don't want to put that in picture in any reader's minds
right
until I can get that developed. You sort of picture your character a certain way, but I don't want everybody to have
like
to
a
do that.
celebrity in mind or something.
Oh, well, sure. In my case, it was something like Jon Snow with a bad scar on his face. I think that's kind of how I pictured it, but I don't want anybody else to be constrained to that.
I did. Speaking of that scar, I really felt the book grab me right from the start because you're not being nice to your character there.
No.
In chapters 1 through 5ish there, but especially right at the damn start, I was like, oh, he's getting messed up. Is he the main? Yeah, no, it's the main character. It's his name.
Yeah, and I wanted the scar to kind of represent and get it out right in the open that he is a scarred man. I mean, he's a flawed man. He's not. I like to refer back to Eric Bright Eyes. I like that character a lot from the Haggard book. He's not particularly noble. He might work out that he is, but he's just a flawed guy, and I want him to carry some kind of scar through his life that he can't shake like we all do.
Sorry, for those who aren't familiar, do you mind just briefly saying who Eric Bright Eyes is? What's he from?
Eric Bright Eyes, it's, what is it, H.R.R. Haggard? Is that the writer's? Okay, I think it's 2 R's in H.R.R. Haggard, who wrote the Alan Quatermain books. Was it Solomon's Mines? I think that was the name of it. At some point, I don't know, 15 years or so ago, I was getting into William Morris, trying to look back at what Tolkien and Lewis's influences were, so to speak. And Haggard's name came up. And I'm like, oh, I used to watch those movies when I was a kid. These African safari kind of things that he did. And Eric Bright Eyes came up as a kind of a Nordic story, and it's just written beautifully. So I'd highly recommend it. In fact, the name Scalagram popped right out of that book. He's have you read it? Have you read Eric Bright Eyes?
Myself? No, not yet.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I think Brian Murphy refers to it in his book on sword and sorcery. But it's just a phenomenal story, written beautifully. And the character Scalagram in that book is a berserker.
Uh-huh.
He's an alcoholic berserker. And I think years ago I even thought, hey, it'd be neat to take that guy's story and write it out and see what happens with it. Anyway, and it ditched that idea and just took the name. But yeah, I think everybody into our genre should definitely pick that up and read it.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I love going back and to your own influences and then going, yeah, who influenced them, and just following the chain, because you never know what you're going to learn, what you're going to pick up. I can of course be one of the many people who can thank Howard Andrew Jones for drawing attention to the author Howard Lamb, who was a major influence on Robert E. Howard, Conan. So many Howards. The chain of Howards is a fine chain to follow if you want to learn a bit about pacing, for example. Yeah. So yeah, actually, this is the book, huh? So, so Scalagram in the Vale of Pacarna. How would you describe it to someone who knows nothing about the book or its story? What's the wee pitch?
Well, they do this with albums when they try to review, they're always going to. It's hard to not compare it to someone else. And in my case, it's best described, I think, if I at least say what writers influenced it. I wanted it to build towards a story that could fall under the umbrella of cosmic horror. I don't think the first book is. The story, as it grows, will become that. My own twist on cosmic horror. I'm not as hopeless as as most of those writers are. So there's a lot of Lovecraft in it. I overuse adjectives, and a couple of critics have definitely picked up on that. It was described as Baroque by some. I'm like, I had to look that up. I'm like, now I know what Baroque means, but heavily ornamented. Yeah, I get it. So, and it was my first book. I think I've made a few mistakes in it, but as far as my choices, how things went, boy, I'm making a long answer out of this. So.
It's all right. Hey, I thought it was really well crafted. Period. Never mind for a first novel.
Thank you.
But certainly for a first novel.
But yeah, I'd say anyone that likes sword and sorcery, that would also enjoy a little bit of Lovecraftian horror mixed in, some of the hopelessness of the writings, like of Clark Ashton Smith. They would like it. He's a flawed character. He's not a muscle guy. He's not Conan. He's certainly not Elric. He's not a sorcerer, and he's not an elf of some sort. He's just a young guy that's really lonely, that's found himself in a terrible situation, and it's very unfair. His memory has been stolen. He sees a girl. So this is, somebody referred to this as a Chase the Princess story, and I guess in a way it is. But he sees a girl, he knows he loves her, but he can't remember really anything about why. And she's being kidnapped in front of his eyes while people are trying to kill him. So the novel starts off with a bang. And it's all bad and nothing's good. And the further this poor guy goes along his trip to try to find her and find out what's happened to himself, the worse things get. And that, I think, is something anybody, at least of a certain age, can relate to. So I wanted him to be a very relatable character. He's full of self-doubt. It gnaws at him continually. He gets through one situation, and here comes another. And he has no idea what's coming at him next, and no idea what's happened, and no idea if he's not just made all of it up in his head. So he's a very torn and conflicted character, out of his element. But he does get help from on high, and that was important to me, was the strength or the hope that he would need to get through this. It didn't come from inside him at all. It came because he cried out for help and didn't even know who he was talking to, and suddenly here comes the magic sword. So all of these things, even though they're sword and sorcery, they represent to me, there's a subtext, in other words. The sword to me represents hope. Scalagrim is just any of us that's trying to get through life. The girl, in this case, that he's hunting, she represents joy that has been lost. And if you've experienced that before, in any sort of a tragedy, it's devastating, and you just sort of lose your way. And so I wanted to make a character that could go through some of these things, and let's see how he works through it and comes out the other end. The subtext to me, though, I don't want to overwhelm the story, and it's not allegory, but I do think it's important. In my case, I didn't want to write Pulp Fiction, in other words. I wanted there to be something bigger behind the basic story, and people can pick up on that or not, however they enjoy reading. So they can look for it; it's there.
Yeah, well, I mean, people. There's one thing that I've been reminded of quite a bit recently, is that you have no control over what people will take from your art. You can only put stuff there, and they'll pick up what they pick up. But if it's not there, they can't pick it up, right?
Correct. Yeah. It's the way we did things with our albums. You know, I have a worldview that I present through our albums, but it's not there to. I'm not trying to beat anybody in the head with it. It's just there. If you pick up on it, great. It'll add to your enjoyment of it. And if not, I hope that it stands alone without all that. So
Yeah.
my mission, I think, even in music, is to create something people will enjoy, not to get a point across. That's for me. But it's still there.
Or even enjoy while hearing that point.
Yeah.
I think there's nothing wrong. I feel like I've been saying this a lot on the podcast lately, so I'm not going to repeat myself or go on at length, but I feel like there's always your story's always going to say something. You may as well be intentional about it
Yep.
because then you control more so what it says.
Yeah.
The attempt to avoid, people who get embarrassed when they say, "Oh, I don't have themes, I don't have messages in my story." It's like, well, yeah, I mean, you do in a way because they're always influenced by who you are as a person, your collection of, experiences, beliefs, and all the choices you make in the tale. So you may as well be intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that too, that probably, in my case, it came for me ahead of the plot. I found myself developing the plot as I went. I would never do that again. You have to, and I was just learning also, what is writing a novel? What's the
So it sounds like you weren't a big outliner then. It was more of a
No,
pantsing, as some people like to call it.
It was pantsing. Yeah, a lot of the characters just showed up on the page. One or two of them came from previous concept albums I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of what's happened, the big stuff that happened only because I started writing it. Originally it was just a guy looking for a girl fighting sorcerers. And it became, as Tolkien said, it grew in the telling. It just became, and I like to let it go that way. To me, that's part of the fun, is discovering these things. Like, you don't come up with them. You don't know where they come from. They're just there in front of you, and it just takes on a whole life of its own. It's fantastic. It's fun, if nothing else, to let that happen.
Well, I admire you and people like you who can do that. Oh man. Well, I guess if you've heard any of my outlining episodes on the podcast, like I gotta figure it all out. I gotta figure out so much. I do leave room. I mean, you have to, otherwise you're literally just writing the story. But yeah, I get wary of not having a blueprint, and then I watch other people just. It's like I'm sitting on the beach building the most archaic, sands castle, and then we have a protractor ruler, and some of the guys just surfing on the water. And I'm like, I want to. How do you do that?
There's a famous scene from it's the old movie Waterloo, and I think this is a real incident where Wellington is sitting on the battlefield before the battle, reading the paper, leaned up against a tree, and his one of his generals that served under him have come up, and they're like, and he's not told them anything. And they're like, well, what's the plan? And he just looks up from his paper and says, well, to win. I know that he had more of a plan than that, but my idea is you have a basic plan, but then anything can happen, like in a battle. And you got to be ready to move when it does, and alter your plan. It's the same thing. You can write an outline, and I've done that, like on this second book I'm working on. And I know when I write it, it's going to get thrown out. I think there's 10 of them now. I'm using it more or less to try to keep myself in line, so that a 100,000 word novel doesn't become 250,000 words. So I'm trying to map out what needs to happen and what needs to happen where. But if something interesting happens along the way, I'm going to dive on it. We'll just start a different book.
Oh, that's a great flexibility to have. Something I was wondering actually while I was reading, I thought, I love to make playlists for projects. I find that they, if I switch between one story and another one, if I can switch to a playlist, I identify with that story. It gets my head in the game quicker. But then I thought, well, hang on, it's a little different with this book, right? Like, what music did you listen to while writing it? And was it Glasshammer, or would it be hearing your own stuff be too distracting? Like,
yeah, it would be. And I've separated the two. I mean, I really have. Once I started writing the book, I'm like, this character is not the same as that one on the album. If you read that, I think I sent you the PDFs and all that. If you read the story in the albums, it comes across a little more like Conan. I did this, I did that, And this character in the book is just like I said, he's just a beat up, miserable guy, and having the worst time of his life. And so it's very different. And I didn't listen to the music, except we were writing it while I was while I was writing it. But what I would do is I would put these headphones on while I typed sometimes, and just put on these atmospheres, like ambiance, like a dungeon. You hear dripping water and just creepy things and wind blowing, and I just kind of let myself go with that, just to kind of close myself off from everything. So not music, for sure. It was more about soundscapes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because I am comfortable listening to music with lyrics when I'm writing, but again, it's not my music.
Yeah.
And it just kind of made me think. I was like, I can't listen to a podcast while I write a story, because that's almost like trying to do math while someone shouts random numbers in your ear.
Yeah.
And I guess, maybe to a degree for some people, that's the same feeling with music with lyrics, and you just want some nice, clean, atmospheric stuff, as you say, to help get you in the zone.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just sitting and particularly sitting in this room I'm in right now, and just kind of get off to myself and not listen to anything, and just write. And there's a million distractions, but that comes with the territory.
So I think you mentioned, pardon me, I know you mentioned the original inspiration sort of for Scalagrim. How long was the road from your first notion of, hey, I'm going to do this, to holding a finished copy of the book in your hand?
I guess so. What the lockdown was 2019, 2020. It's lost to me now.
Well, I mean, in Canada, certainly we didn't really even know what was going on until mid-March 2020.
Yes, so it was 2020, and I think in June or May, April, I guess they shut all our businesses down here, and so it was started then, and then just came out last March, this past March. So from 2020 to 2022, but a lot of that, I guess it was written and completed in about 7 months. And then the rest of the time was just trying to figure out, how to put that book out. I didn't waste too much time looking for a publisher. I've never been one to sit around and wait. And so I had to figure out how to print it. It's the whole Amazon KDP thing was, for indie publishers, was a little more involved than I remembered it to be in 2015. So, it's just a lot of time researching what I was about to do after I wrote it, and then editing and editing and editing and editing.
Yeah, I was going to say, how was the editing? Did you have beta reader buddies? Did you work with a professional editor?
I only went with one beta reader, and he was a Glass Hammer fan, so I knew that it was going to be tricky, because he was probably going to like everything. And but he had reams of stuff he sent me. It had meant so much to him. And oh my gosh, this might be good. This might not be bad. And so that helped. And I sent it to him in stages before I was done, and then sent him the whole thing. And he was ecstatic. It made him cry. And if I can make somebody cry, then that's a win, I guess. But then I went with an editor, and then I had to edit the editor. And then I saw some neat reviews where, there's no typos in this. There's no typos. It's unbelievable. Most books have typos. There's no typos. And then somebody wrote me, it was about a month ago, like, here's a list of the typos I found. Like, thanks. Thanks. I'd rather just not have known at this point. So I got 5 or 6 of those. It's just endless. I guess I read it 18 times after I was done, and marked it up in my Kindle. And then we'd go sit down and try to rework it without screwing up the format.
Yeah.
It was grueling. But I thought, if I don't hate this after reading it so many times, then okay, it must be okay.
Well, yeah, isn't that the test? You're talking about the typos and still finding the bloody things, well after you think it's finished. I have been, doing kind of an audiobook thing, bonus for my Patreon, where I read through my first couple of novels and talk about each chapter as I go along. Mm-hmm. The second book in particular, like, I had a professional editor go through that. I went through that many times, and I have been finding typos as I read it into the record. And it's, oh my God, on the one hand, great, I can fix them because it's self-pub. It's easy to go in there and do that.
Yeah.
But But oh my God, I would have thought by now, But then, as you say, there's the other experience that's very pleasing when you read your book for the upteenth time of like, there's the parts in the book that I really want to, I mean, you want the whole thing to impact people, but there's the moments you really want to hit the reader. And if you read those moments and you feel kind of that, yeah, feeling that you had when you were first writing it still,
Yeah. It's
that can't be bad, can it?
a sense of wonder is what I would describe that as. If you can bring your character to a place and you read it and you feel what you wanted to make other people feel, and you can kind of be sort of objective and stand back as if you're reading a story you didn't write, and it works on you. And I think that's what we all got to do, whatever it is, music, art, anything. You just write for yourself. And if you make yourself happy, then there's probably a few thousand people, at least in a planet with several billion people, that are going to be okay with that and like what you did. You just have to find them,
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think we're reinventing the wheel here with Scalagram. It's, that type of book has been done plenty. It's just maybe there's something I have to offer, that kind of a story that somebody else wouldn't have thought of.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's your execution,
Right.
and it's got your sort of music in there. I mean, there's literally songs in the in the book,
Yeah.
Which I mean has been done in human history, but I have not seen a lot of.
Well, that was a
certainly
definite.
contemporary stuff.
That was a Tolkien thing for me. It was that so many
Yeah.
poems, and when I first read it, I just loved the songs. And early on, I had the songbook, that went with Tolkien's stuff. And so I determined if I ever did this, it was going to have either Glasshammer lyrics in it or brand new lyrics, and it was just something I enjoyed as a reader. Growing up, it just added something to it. The instructions usually are, if it doesn't develop the plot, advance the plot, then leave it out. Who cares? Sing a song. People sing.
Yeah.
So sing a song. And this character Scalagram, literally at one of the most horrible moments, I guess, or he's about to go through one of the worst, just breaks into a song on top of a hilltop, and I'm like, is this Sound of Music or what's going on? Picture him lifting his voice on high,
But what a neat setting for that kind of singing, to even if it is a bit like Sound of Music, like whatever. First of all, insanely popular story,
Yeah.
but also, I mean, part of the fun is I think in creating is well, it's almost like remixing. Like I don't think anybody reading this book would. I mean, like maybe after they listen to this interview, but if they just came in cold, would be expecting the music to come in, and that makes you kind of go what, and snap back and then refocus, and then go, okay, I got to read this bit a little differently.
Yeah.
It really draws your attention to what you're reading. I think if nothing else, adds value for that.
Well,
aside from also being very
and
pretty.
Since our lyrics were often stories too, I put one in. There's the character Swanhild, and she kind of sings a song at some point in the book that I had written, and there's characters mentioned in the song, and that's given me sort of a way to do some different characters in the new book and introduce those characters. So they're introduced through lyrics, and then they sort of jump out of those lyrics and come alive. So it's it serves many purposes, but mainly it's just I like to see italicized verses smack in the middle of a chapter every now and then.
And then with that white space as well. So again, it describes you, right?
Yeah.
So as we're getting near the end here, I wonder, was Scalagram always going to be a series? Or was that something you discovered as you were working on it?
No, I think I knew it would take more books to tell the story. And I do know how it ends. So no, it was always going to be at the very least a trilogy, if not a quartet. And I've also got the possibility of doing short stories later with the characters. So I'm leaving some big time gaps that can be filled in later. Because to me, I think that'd be fun too. Is once people know the character, let's go back and just do some more short stories and like traditional sword and sorcery stories. Things that
well, I mean, that's certainly a tradition, right? I mean, Warcock's doing it right now.
Yes,
He's got,
he is,
a book just coming out with sort of Elric from since sort of kind of the first quarter of Elric's original adventures. He's found a gap and wedged a whole new novel in there.
Yeah. You find the gap. So I built the gap in ahead of time. And,
Very cool. Is there anything you can sort of tease us with without giving it too much away as to what's coming up next for Scalagram in the books to come?
In the books to come, he's going to war. At the end, I can't really spoil the end of book one, but I will say that he has many more trials ahead of him, and he does evolve as a character. He's definitely got an arc. He may get a little ahead of himself in the next book and finally gain some confidence that doesn't particularly work out for him. And I guess my big thing is to just amp up the horror element the further we go, and leave people hanging every time. But I do promise I know how it ends, and it won't end like anybody thinks it's going to. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
Awesome. So, all right, let's wrap it up here. Where should people look for you online if they are interested in your novel and, of course, musical endeavors?
Musical endeavors is glasshammer.com. And if you're into progressive rock, you may have heard of us. If not, please give us a try. All kinds of music. We have heavy to hard kind of metal prog, and to really beautiful symphonic stuff. And then the books, I'm on Stephen R. Babb. That's STEPHEN, middle initial R, Babb, BABB.com. And of course, it's on Amazon and
cool.
Pretty much anywhere else for Kindle, for ebooks, whatever. But there's print books available.
Okay, awesome. I'll put those links in the show notes, listeners, so easy peasy to find and click on. Go through, buy that book, buy that album, do it all.
Yes, please. That would be great.
And there's a new album coming, right?
Yes, it's called At the Gate, and it will wrap up the album versions of Scalagrim's life. But again, I've decided we're going to keep that bit a little separate from the books. It's not going to end the same way the books will, so there's no spoilers built into the albums. But yeah, we've done 3 Scalagrim albums. We're working on it today, that 3rd album. At the Gate. Due out October 7th this year, so we're about done.
Awesome. And I enjoyed listening to the 2 albums you sent me. Thank you so much. I must admit, I was listening to it and I thought, maybe I'm more into prog rock than I realized, or maybe this is just really good. And so I don't think I mentioned this before, but I'm threading in some of your tunes to the episode today instead of our usual theme music. And I thought we might go out on The Forlorn Hope.
Okay.
I particularly enjoyed that track. Yeah. And just out of curiosity, is there any story behind that song or anything fun you want to tell the listener about it?
Gosh, no, the whole album was fun. We had just introduced a brand new singer, Hannah Pryor, so we were having a blast working with her. And the Forlorn Hope is a phrase actually taken from some of my historical fiction readings, which is it's that group of people that run through the breach ahead of everybody else in a big siege. And they're called the Forlorn Hope because they're not expected to live. So that's how that works out, yeah.
Cheers. All right, well, this was really wonderful, Steve. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and for lending us your music for the show. I think it's going to be really fun.
Oh, great. Thank you.
All right, take care.
All right.
So I'm Writing a Novel features original intro, transition, and outro music by Glasshammer, and is hosted by yours truly, Oliver Brackenbury. If you'd like to submit a question, then please email it to soimwritinganovel@gmail.com. You can also holler at the show on Twitter. Look for @so_writing. That's @so_writing. Please consider sharing the show with anybody who might like it, or checking out any of the other ways you can support the show by heading to soimwritinganovel.com/support the show, which has things like links to our Patreon, Coffee, and PayPal. Thanks for hanging out with me and Steve Babb, and I'll see you next time. For now, here's a little track by Glasshammer I may have mentioned at the end of the interview.